It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday. For 32-year-old Sarah Mitchell, ordinary was exactly how she liked it. For nearly 8 years, Sarah had worked as a senior reconciliation specialist at a regional bank in Columbus, Ohio. Her job wasn't exciting. She wasn't a detective, lawyer, or investigator. She stared at numbers all day. Most people would have found it boring. Sarah loved it. Numbers made sense. People didn't. Every morning she arrived at work before everyone else, carrying a coffee in one hand and a neatly organized planner in the other. By 7:15 a.m., she was sitting at her desk reviewing transaction reports. She expected nothing unusual. She was wrong. Very wrong. That morning, a routine reconciliation report landed in her inbox. Normally, she reviewed hundreds of transactions without finding anything significant, but one entry caught her eye. At first, she thought she was seeing things. She blinked, then leaned closer to the screen. A transfer of $1 million. Sarah frowned. Large transfers happened every day. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was where the money had gone. The transfer originated from a corporate investment account belonging to the prestigious Harrison Family Trust. The destination account belonged to someone named Daniel Reed. Sarah had never heard of him. That wasn't necessarily suspicious, but something felt wrong. She opened the transaction details. The account receiving the money had been inactive for nearly 3 years. No deposits, no withdrawals, nothing. Then suddenly, $1 million appeared. Sarah's stomach tightened. That's strange. She checked again. Maybe a wealthy client had simply reactivated an old account. Possible, but unlikely. She pulled additional records. The transfer authorization form appeared legitimate. The signatures matched. The approval codes matched. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Sarah had learned something over the years. Real transactions usually contain tiny imperfections. A typo, a correction, a note, something human. Fraudulent records often looked flawless. This one was flawless. She decided to investigate further, just in case. At 8:30 a.m., Sarah walked into her manager's office. Her manager, Robert Gaines, was a 55-year-old banking veteran who had spent decades in finance. He looked up from his computer. "Morning, Sarah." "Morning." She handed him a printed report. "Can you take a look at this?" Robert adjusted his glasses. "What am I looking for?" "The Reed transfer." His eyes moved down the page. "Oh." Sarah noticed something. A brief flicker. A tiny reaction. Gone almost immediately. But she saw it. "Something wrong?" she asked. Robert shook his head. "No." "You've seen this account before?" "No." The answer came too quickly. Sarah felt a small knot form in her stomach. Robert handed back the report. "Probably a bookkeeping issue." "$1 million bookkeeping issue?" He laughed. "Those happen more often than you'd think." Sarah wasn't convinced. "Should I open a review file?" Robert hesitated, only for a second. But Sarah noticed. No need. That surprised her. Every unexplained 7-figure transaction normally required documentation. It was policy. Strict policy. "Are you sure?" Robert smiled. "I'm sure." Sarah left the office. But now she felt worse. Not better. That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The transaction bothered her. The manager's reaction bothered her even more. At home, Sarah sat at her kitchen table reviewing public records. She wasn't supposed to investigate clients outside official channels, but she wasn't accessing private information, only public information. And public information revealed something interesting. Daniel Reed owned almost nothing. No business. No known investments. No expensive property. No signs of wealth. Nothing. Yet somehow $1 million had landed in his account. It made no sense. The next morning she arrived earlier than usual. She opened the transaction history again. This time she noticed something she had missed. The transfer approval code belonged to an employee named Michael Turner. Sarah frowned. That was impossible. Michael Turner had retired 2 years earlier. She stared at the screen, then checked again. The authorization credentials belonged to a retired employee. Her pulse quickened. Now she knew something was wrong. Very wrong. By lunchtime, she had gathered enough evidence to justify opening an internal inquiry. Policy required it. She submitted the request. 20 minutes later, it was rejected. Rejected. Without explanation. Sarah stared at the email. That had never happened before. Ever. She picked up her phone, called compliance. A woman answered. Compliance department. This is Sarah Mitchell. Hi, Sarah. I submitted an inquiry request. Pause. The woman's voice became cautious. Yes. It was rejected. Another pause. Then, that decision came from executive management. Sarah sat up straighter. Executive management? Why would executives care about a reconciliation inquiry? Who specifically? I'm not authorized to say. The call ended. Sarah felt cold. Something bigger was happening. She could feel it. 3 days later, Daniel Reed disappeared. Nobody knew it at first. The discovery happened by accident. A routine verification call failed. Then another. Then another. Eventually, someone visited his listed address. The house was empty. Neighbors hadn't seen him in weeks. No forwarding address. No explanation. Nothing. The million-dollar recipient had vanished. Now even the people who dismissed Sarah's concerns began paying attention. An emergency meeting was called. Executives gathered. Compliance officers gathered. Risk analysts gathered. For the first time, everyone seemed worried. Sarah sat quietly in the conference room, listening, watching, learning. A senior executive stood. We have a situation. The room remained silent. The recipient of the Harrison transfer cannot be located. Murmurs spread across the room. The executive continued. We are initiating a full review. Sarah almost laughed. A full review. The same review she had requested days earlier. The same review they had refused. Now suddenly they wanted answers. The investigation began immediately. Within 48 hours, investigators uncovered another surprise. Daniel Reed's account wasn't the only suspicious account. There were others. 5 others. Each showed unusual activity. Each had received large sums of money. Each transfer appeared legitimate. And each approval record contained strange inconsistencies. Retired employees. Inactive credentials. Missing documentation. The pattern was emerging. Someone had been manipulating the system. But how? And for how long? No one knew. Yet, 2 weeks later, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. A man in a dark suit approached her desk. Sarah Mitchell? Yes. He showed identification. Federal Financial Crimes Division. Sarah's heart skipped. I'm Special Agent Marcus Hayes. I've heard of your investigation. Marcus nodded. We'd like your help. Sarah stared. My help? You were the first person to flag the transaction. She nodded slowly. Yes. Marcus pulled out a chair. What made you look twice? Sarah thought carefully. The account. What about it? It felt wrong. Marcus smiled. That's not a technical answer. No. What is it? Sarah looked him directly in the eye. The transaction looked too perfect. For the first time all day, Marcus smiled. That's exactly what I thought. Over the following weeks, Sarah worked closely with investigators. The deeper they dug, the stranger things became. Every suspicious transaction led to another. Every answer created new questions. Then they found something shocking. A hidden archive. An old digital storage server scheduled for deletion. Inside were thousands of archived records. Most were ordinary. Some were not. One file immediately caught Marcus's attention. Its title was simple. Adjustments. Inside were transaction logs stretching back nearly 9 years. Sarah's blood ran cold. 9 years. The fraud hadn't happened once. It had been happening for nearly a decade. And the amount stolen wasn't $1 million. Not even close. As investigators totaled the numbers, silence filled the room. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Finally, Marcus looked up from the screen. His face had gone pale. Sarah. What? You need to see this. She walked over, looked at the final figure. and nearly stopped breathing. The total wasn't 1 million. It wasn't 5 million. It wasn't even 10 million. Over 9 years, someone had stolen more than $47 million. 47 million. Hidden in plain sight, using fake approvals, ghost accounts, and carefully disguised transactions. The million-dollar mistake wasn't the crime. It was the error that exposed it. And whoever had built the scheme now knew investigators were getting close. Very close. Because later that night, as Marcus drove home from the office, his phone rang. An anonymous voice whispered only 6 words before hanging up. "Stop digging, or someone dies." Special Agent Marcus Hayes sat motionless in his car. The anonymous caller had already disconnected. For several seconds, the only sound was the hum of the engine. "Stop digging, or someone dies." 6 words. That was all. But Marcus had worked financial crimes for nearly 15 years. He knew the difference between an empty threat and a serious one. This felt serious. Very serious. Because fraudsters rarely threatened federal agents. People only made threats when they were scared. And people only became scared when investigators got close to the truth. Marcus immediately notified his supervisor. Within an hour, the threat had been documented and traced. Unfortunately, the caller had used a disposable phone. The trail ended there. For now. But one thing was certain. Someone inside the fraud network knew exactly how much investigators had discovered. And that meant the conspiracy was larger than anyone imagined. The following morning, Sarah arrived at the office to find Marcus waiting beside her desk. He looked exhausted. "Rough night?" she asked. Marcus gave a humorless smile. "You could say that." He told her about the phone call. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. "You think they're watching us?" Marcus shrugged. "I think somebody is paying attention." Neither of them liked that answer. The investigation expanded rapidly. Federal agents obtained warrants. Bank records were seized. Email archives were examined. Old employee files were reviewed. The deeper investigators dug, the stranger the story became. The suspicious accounts all shared one thing in common. Every single one had been opened by the same employee, a man named Thomas Calloway. Thomas had worked at the bank for 22 years. He retired 6 years earlier. According to official records, he was living quietly in Arizona. Marcus immediately arranged an interview. 3 days later, agents sat across from Thomas in his small retirement home. The 70-year-old looked confused, then concerned, then shocked. "Those accounts?" He shook his head. "I didn't open them." Marcus slid documents across the table. "Your employee ID was used." Thomas examined them. His hands began trembling. "That's impossible." "Why?" "Because I wasn't even in Ohio when these accounts were opened." Marcus leaned forward. "Can you prove that?" Thomas stood, walked to a filing cabinet, returned with a stack of documents. Plane tickets, medical records, hotel receipts, everything. Every suspicious account had been created while Thomas was hundreds of miles away. Someone had stolen his credentials and used them for years. Meanwhile, Sarah was reviewing archived transaction logs. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Patterns slowly emerged. Most people looked at individual transactions. Sarah looked at timing. Timing told stories. And timing revealed something disturbing. The suspicious transfers always happened during specific periods. Late evenings, holiday weekends, major storms, times when fewer employees were working, times when fewer people were paying attention. Whoever orchestrated the fraud understood banking operations extremely well. This wasn't amateur work. This was professional, careful, patient, almost invisible. One afternoon, Sarah noticed something odd. A name. Not on a transaction, not on an account, on an approval review. The name appeared repeatedly. Linda Harper. Sarah frowned. Linda worked in compliance. She had been with the bank for nearly 15 years. Every suspicious transaction seemed to pass through a review stage connected to Linda. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe not. Sarah printed the records, then walked directly to Marcus. He studied the documents. "Interesting. You think she's involved?" Marcus shook his head. I don't know, but I want to talk to her. The interview took place the next day. Linda seemed nervous from the moment she entered the room. Marcus noticed immediately. Sarah noticed too. Linda sat down, crossed her arms, avoided eye contact. Marcus started gently. How long have you worked for the bank? 14 years. Do you know Daniel Reed? No. What about these transactions? No. Marcus placed several documents on the table. Linda glanced at them. Her face changed instantly. Not fear, recognition. Marcus saw it. So did Sarah. You've seen these before. Linda swallowed. No. Linda. I said no. Marcus leaned forward. Then why did your expression change? Silence. A long silence. Then, Linda started crying. Not dramatically, quietly, like someone carrying a burden for years. Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus. Neither interrupted. Eventually, Linda spoke. I didn't steal anything. Marcus remained calm. Then tell us what happened. Linda looked at the table, then whispered. I was told not to ask questions. The room became silent. By who? Marcus asked. Linda hesitated for almost 30 seconds. Then she answered. Robert Gaines. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Hair manager. The same manager who dismissed her concerns. The same manager who rejected the original inquiry. That evening, investigators executed a search warrant at Robert Gaines's office. The results were explosive. Hidden inside a locked cabinet were dozens of paper files. Most appeared ordinary, some did not. Several contained handwritten notes, internal memos, authorization overrides, missing documentation, evidence that should never have existed, evidence someone had tried very hard to hide. But the biggest discovery came from Robert's computer. Forensic analysts recovered deleted emails. Thousands of deleted emails. Most were harmless. A few were devastating. One email contained a single sentence. Move the funds through Reed before quarter close. Another read. Use retired credentials again, nobody checks. A third was even worse. Destroy the original records. Marcus stared at the screen. Sarah felt sick. This wasn't negligence. This wasn't incompetence. This was deliberate, systematic, criminal. Agents immediately attempted to locate Robert Gaines. But there was a problem. He was gone. His office was empty. His phone was disconnected. His credit cards hadn't been used. His house was abandoned. Nobody knew where he was. The prime suspect had disappeared, just like Daniel Reed. The next week brought another shocking discovery. Investigators finally located Daniel Reed, or at least they thought they had. The address led to a small apartment building outside Cleveland. The man living there was named Daniel Reed, but he wasn't the Daniel Reed from the bank records. He was 68 years old, retired, living on Social Security, and completely confused. Marcus showed him a photograph. Is this you? The old man adjusted his glasses. No. Do you own this bank account? No. Have you ever had an account at Harrison Regional Bank? No. Marcus exchanged a look with another agent. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The Daniel Reed receiving millions of dollars didn't exist. The identity had been stolen. Someone had created an entirely fake person and used a real citizen's information to do it. Back at headquarters, investigators uncovered an even bigger problem. The fake Daniel Reed wasn't alone. 4 of the 6 suspicious accounts belonged to stolen identities. Real people, real names, real social security numbers, but fake accounts, which raised a terrifying question. If the account holders weren't real, then where did the money actually go? Nobody knew. Yet, 2 days later, Sarah found the answer. Purely by accident. She was reviewing international wire records when a transfer code caught her attention. The number matched one found in the archive files. She followed the trail. Then another. Then another. The transfers jumped through multiple accounts, multiple banks, multiple countries. Whoever designed the system understood how to hide money. But eventually, every trail led to the same destination. A private investment company, located in the Cayman Islands. Marcus immediately subpoenaed the records. Weeks passed. Then the response arrived. The ownership documents listed only one name. When Marcus read it, he couldn't believe it. Neither could Sarah. Because the owner wasn't Robert Gaines. It wasn't Daniel Reed. It wasn't anyone investigators had suspected. The owner was a member of the Harrison family themselves. The same family whose trust account had supposedly been the victim. The same family whose money had been stolen. One of them wasn't a victim at all. One of them had been involved from the beginning. And that changed everything. Because suddenly the fraud wasn't just a bank crime. It was a family conspiracy worth nearly $50 million. And somewhere inside the Harrison family was the person pulling the strings. The person who had spent 9 years hiding in plain sight. The person willing to threaten federal agents to protect their secret. Marcus looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back. Neither said a word. Because both were thinking the same thing. The real investigation was only beginning. For nearly 2 weeks, the Harrison family refused to cooperate. Lawyers answered every question. Lawyers attended every meeting. Lawyers blocked every request. The family's public image was spotless. For more than 80 years, the Harrisons had been one of Ohio's wealthiest and most respected families. They owned businesses, properties, investments, charities. Their name appeared on hospitals, university buildings, and community centers. To the public, they represented success. But Marcus Hayes had spent enough years investigating wealthy people to know something important. The cleaner the image, the dirtier the secrets often were. The Harrison Family Trust had been established by the family patriarch, Richard Harrison Sr. After his death, management of the trust passed to his 3 children, William Harrison, Patricia Harrison, and Charles Harrison. Each controlled part of the family's massive fortune. Each claimed complete ignorance regarding the missing millions. Marcus didn't believe all of them. Maybe 1, maybe 2, but not all 3. Somebody was lying. The challenge was figuring out who. Sarah spent days reviewing decades of trust records. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then she noticed something. The money wasn't stolen randomly. The withdrawals followed a pattern, a very specific pattern. The fraud always targeted dormant funds, unused investments, forgotten reserves, accounts nobody actively monitored. Someone understood the trust structure intimately. Someone who knew exactly where people weren't looking. Late one evening, Sarah sat alone in the investigation office. Stacks of documents surrounded her. Coffee cups covered her desk. Her eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. Then suddenly she froze. A number jumped off the page. She checked it again. Then again. Her heart began racing. No way. She grabbed another file. Then another. The dates matched. Every suspicious transfer occurred within days of meetings attended by one particular family member, Charles Harrison. The next morning, Sarah showed Marcus her findings. He studied the records carefully. Could be coincidence. Sarah nodded. That's what I thought. But she slid another document across the desk. Marcus read it, then sat back. The document listed private trust access logs. Charles Harrison had viewed every affected account shortly before funds disappeared. Every single one. Marcus frowned. Now that's not coincidence. Charles Harrison was 58 years old. Charming, educated, respected, publicly known for his philanthropy. He sat on charity boards, donated to schools, funded community projects. The media loved him. People trusted him, which made him the perfect suspect. Nobody suspects the man who appears perfect. A formal interview was scheduled. Charles arrived with 2 attorneys. Expensive suits. Confident smiles. The appearance of complete control. Marcus began asking questions. Charles answered calmly, politely, almost effortlessly, until Marcus mentioned Robert Gaines. For the first time, Charles hesitated, only briefly. But Marcus noticed. So you knew Robert? Charles nodded. Professionally. How well? Not very well. Marcus slid a photograph across the table. The picture showed Charles and Robert together at a private golf club, both smiling, both appearing very comfortable. Charles stared at the photograph, then looked up. My attorney advises me not to answer further questions. The interview ended shortly afterward. Marcus watched Charles leave, then turned to Sarah. "He's hiding something." Sarah nodded. "Definitely." 3 days later, investigators located Robert Gaines. Or rather, Robert's car. It was discovered abandoned near a remote lake in Michigan. The vehicle contained no evidence of violence, no fingerprints, no personal belongings. No Robert. He had vanished completely. Again. But this time, investigators discovered something he left behind. A small notebook hidden beneath the driver's seat. Inside were handwritten account numbers, transfer code, meeting dates, names. Dozens of names. Most meant nothing. One did. Charles Harrison. Repeated over and over. The notebook transformed the investigation. Federal prosecutors immediately expanded their inquiry. Search warrants multiplied. Financial records poured in. And then investigators found the first direct connection. A secret payment. 8 years earlier, a consulting company controlled by Charles Harrison had transferred $500,000 to Robert Gaines. The payment was disguised as business consulting. But there was a problem. Robert had never performed consulting work. Ever. Marcus stared at the document. "This is it." Sarah wasn't convinced. "Not enough." Marcus nodded. She was right. It suggested corruption, but it didn't prove fraud. They needed more. Much more. Then came the breakthrough nobody expected. An elderly accountant named Frank Delaney contacted investigators. Frank was 74 years old, retired, quiet, the type of man nobody noticed. But Frank had worked for the Harrison Family Trust for nearly 30 years, and he carried a secret that had haunted him for almost a decade. When Marcus met him, Frank looked terrified. "I should have come forward sooner." Marcus remained patient. "What happened?" Frank took a deep breath, then told them everything. 9 years earlier, Frank discovered a discrepancy. Not a large one, only about $200,000. At first he assumed it was an accounting error. Then another discrepancy appeared. Then another. Each time he reported the issue. Each time he was told not to worry. Eventually, Charles Harrison personally contacted him. Frank would never forget the conversation. Charles invited him to lunch, smiled, complimented his work, then made a simple request. "Stop asking questions." Frank refused. The next week, he was abruptly pushed into retirement. After 30 years, no explanation, no warning, just gone. Marcus listened carefully. "Why didn't you come forward?" Frank looked ashamed. "Because I was scared." "Of Charles?" Frank nodded, then said something unexpected. "No." Marcus frowned. "Then who?" Frank swallowed hard. "His sister." Sarah leaned forward. "Patricia Harrison?" Frank nodded slowly. The room became silent. Nobody had seriously considered Patricia. Most evidence pointed toward Charles. But now another Harrison had entered the picture. Frank opened an old folder. Inside were photocopies, emails, financial records, handwritten notes, evidence he had secretly kept for nearly 9 years. Marcus's pulse quickened. This was the first genuine insider evidence they had received, and it was explosive. One email in particular changed everything. It contained a short message from Patricia Harrison to Robert Gaines. Just 11 words. "Charles is getting careless. Handle it before anyone notices." Nobody spoke. The implication was devastating. Patricia knew, maybe even controlled the operation. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Neither could Sarah. The case had become far more complicated, because now there were multiple possibilities. Charles could be the mastermind. Patricia could be the mastermind. Or both could be working together. Meanwhile, William Harrison still remained largely untouched by the investigation. Too untouched, which bothered Marcus. Because innocent people usually cooperate, William barely spoke, barely appeared, barely participated, almost like someone trying very hard to stay invisible. The next morning, another bombshell arrived. Forensic accountants completed a full analysis of the stolen funds. The final total wasn't $47 million. It was $63 million. The fraud had been bigger than anyone realized. Much bigger. And the most shocking discovery was still ahead. Because hidden among the transfers was one transaction unlike all the others, a payment of $10 million. Not to a fake account, not to an offshore company, but to a private corporation secretly owned by someone investigators never expected. When Sarah saw the ownership records, she felt her stomach drop. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. Neither could believe it. Because the corporation belonged to William Harrison, the quiet brother, the invisible brother, the brother everyone had ignored. Suddenly, everything changed. Charles, Patricia, William, all three siblings were connected. All three had received money. All three had lied. And if all three were involved, the conspiracy wasn't a family dispute. It was a family empire built on fraud. An empire now beginning to collapse. But before investigators could make their next move, tragedy struck. At 2:17 a.m., local police responded to an emergency call. A vehicle had crashed into a roadside barrier outside Columbus. The driver was dead. When officers identified the victim, Marcus received a call that instantly turned his blood cold. The victim was Frank Delaney, the retired accountant, the whistleblower, the man who had finally started talking. And according to the initial report, the crash looked like an accident. But Marcus didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Not in this case. Not after everything they had discovered. Because every time someone got close to the truth, something happened. The call came at 2:43 a.m. Special Agent Marcus Hayes was asleep when his phone rang. The moment he heard the name, he sat upright in bed. Frank Delaney, dead. The retired accountant who had finally broken his silence. The man who had handed investigators the first real evidence connecting the Harrison family to the fraud. Now he was gone. According to local police, his vehicle had struck a roadside barrier at high speed. A tragic accident. At least that's what the first report said. Marcus didn't buy it. Not for a second. By sunrise, federal investigators were already examining the crash scene. The damaged vehicle sat in an impound lot. Forensic specialists inspected every inch. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one investigator found something. A tiny cut in the brake line. Small, precise, deliberate. Marcus stared at the photographs. There was no doubt. Frank Delaney had not died in an accident. Someone had murdered him. The investigation immediately changed. What had started as a financial crime was now a homicide investigation. And suddenly, everyone connected to the fraud became a potential suspect. Charles Harrison, Patricia Harrison, William Harrison, Robert Gaines. Whoever had arranged Frank's death was desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Marcus intended to find one. 3 days later, another break came. Forensic analysts finally recovered deleted data from Robert Gaines's laptop. Most files had been wiped professionally, but not perfectly. Hidden deep inside the drive was a folder. One folder, protected by multiple layers of encryption. When specialists finally opened it, the room fell silent. The folder contained videos, audio recordings, financial ledgers, emails, years of evidence. Robert Gaines had been documenting everything. Every transfer, every meeting, every payment, every participant. It was an insurance policy. Protection in case someone decided to eliminate him or betray him. Marcus and Sarah spent nearly 12 hours reviewing the files. Near midnight, they found the recording that changed everything. The video was dated 3 years earlier. A private conference room. Charles Harrison, Patricia Harrison, Robert Gaines, and William Harrison, all sitting together, all discussing the fraud. There was no ambiguity, no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. The entire family knew. The entire family participated. But something else stood out. One person controlled the conversation. One person gave instructions. One person made the final decisions. And it wasn't Charles. It wasn't Patricia. It wasn't William. It was Robert Gaines. Sarah stared at the screen. I don't understand. Neither did Marcus. For years they had assumed Robert worked for the Harrisons. But the recording suggested the opposite. The Harrisons weren't directing Robert. Robert was directing them. The deeper they examined the files, the clearer the truth became. 9 years earlier, Robert Gaines had discovered weaknesses inside the bank's transaction system. Weaknesses nobody else noticed. He realized dormant trust funds could be quietly redirected. Small amounts at first, then larger amounts, then millions. But Robert needed access. He needed insiders. That's where the Harrison family entered the picture. At the time, the Harrison family faced a crisis. A disastrous investment had secretly cost them tens of millions of dollars. Publicly, they remained wealthy. Privately, they were terrified. If news became public, their empire could collapse. Robert offered a solution. He would help replace the lost money, quietly, slowly, without anyone noticing. At first, the family resisted. Then desperation won. One bad decision became another, and another, until they were trapped. For 9 years, the fraud grew. Millions disappeared. Records were altered. Employees were manipulated. Whistleblowers were silenced. And Robert Gaines sat at the center of it all. The architect, the mastermind, the man controlling everyone, including the Harrison family. Then Marcus found the final recording, and everything became even darker. The video had been recorded only 4 months earlier. Robert appeared nervous, agitated, afraid. Across the table sat Charles Harrison. The conversation quickly turned hostile. Charles wanted out. The investigation was getting too close. The risks were becoming too high, but Robert refused. Then Charles said something that shocked everyone watching. "If this falls apart, we're all going to prison." Robert laughed, then replied, "No, Charles, you are." The room became silent. Even Charles looked stunned. Then Robert explained. Every document, every authorization, every approval, everything pointed to the Harrison family, not him. If the scheme collapsed, Robert planned to disappear while the family took the blame. He had been setting them up from the beginning. Marcus leaned back in his chair. For years, Robert Gaines had manipulated everyone. The bank, the Harrison family, investigators, everyone. But one question remained. Where was he now? The answer arrived 48 hours later. A border security alert. A man attempting to enter Canada using a fake passport. The photograph matched Robert Gaines. Federal agents moved immediately. Within hours, Robert was arrested. After nearly 3 months on the run, the mastermind was finally in custody. The interrogation lasted 14 hours. At first, Robert denied everything. Then investigators showed him the recordings, the emails, the ledgers, the evidence. His confidence disappeared. By midnight, he knew it was over. And finally, he talked. Robert confessed to nearly everything. The fraud, the fake accounts, the stolen identities, the offshore companies, the forged approvals, the hidden payments. But when Marcus asked about Frank Delaney's murder, Robert shook his head. "I didn't kill him." Marcus didn't believe him. "Why would I?" "Because he was cooperating." Robert looked genuinely confused. Then he said something unexpected. "Frank wasn't my problem." Marcus frowned. "Then whose problem was he?" Robert answered immediately. "Patricia." The room went silent. Investigators revisited Patricia Harrison's communications. This time they weren't looking for fraud. They were looking for murder. And they found it. A series of encrypted messages, private meetings, phone records, payments to a private security contractor. The timeline matched perfectly. Too perfectly. Confronted with the evidence, Patricia eventually confessed. Not to murder, but to ordering someone to scare Frank Delaney. She claimed she never intended for him to die. The contractor told a different story. According to him, Patricia specifically requested permanent silence. Frank Delaney's death had been ordered. Within days, arrests followed. Patricia Harrison, Charles Harrison, William Harrison, Robert Gaines, multiple associates, several contractors. The conspiracy was finally collapsing. The trials lasted nearly a year. The evidence was overwhelming. Video recordings, financial records, witness testimony, digital archives, confessions. One by one, convictions followed. Robert Gaines received the longest sentence, 42 years in federal prison. Patricia Harrison received 30 years. Charles received 22. William received 18. Others received lesser sentences. The Harrison empire never recovered. Properties were sold, companies dissolved, assets seized. The family name that once appeared on hospitals and buildings became associated with one of the largest financial fraud cases in state history. As for Sarah Mitchell, her life changed completely. The ordinary bank employee who noticed a single suspicious transaction became the person who exposed a $63 million criminal enterprise. She received awards, recognition, promotion. But what mattered most wasn't any of that. It was something much simpler. The truth. Nearly 2 years after the arrests, Marcus and Sarah met for coffee. The case was finally closed. The appeals were exhausted. The investigation was over. Marcus smiled. "You know what's funny?" Sarah laughed. "What?" "If you'd ignored that transfer, none of this would have happened." Sarah looked out the window, thinking about everything. The fraud, the threats, the deaths, the lies, the years of deception, all uncovered because of one small detail. One transaction that looked too perfect. Finally, she smiled. "That's the thing about secrets." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What?" Sarah took a sip of coffee. "No matter how carefully you hide them." She paused. "Eventually they make a mistake." And in the end, that was exactly what happened. Not a whistleblower, not a confession, not a lucky break, just a single $1 million mistake. The mistake that brought down an empire.